here.
Why didn't you say it the first time I said Aaron?
Because it's pronounced Aaron.
You done messed up, Aaron!
Hello, everyone. Zach Morgan, welcome. Hello.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody.
It looks like Danny Masterson done messed up. It looks like Mike Shupin done messed up. It looks like Jordan Masterson done messed up. Who knows here, guys?
There's a whole bunch of people done messed up.
Yeah. We're here to talk about the possibility, no matter how remote, and I got to tell you, I'm not quite sure how remote it is, that Danny could be facing more years on federal charges relating to his illegal weapons than he could be facing for what he did to Jane Doe 1, 2, and 3, and many other women. And I haven't had a chance to talk to you about this on a video yet. You're an attorney. It's appropriate that I would at least talk with you about it briefly. And let's just discuss kind of what happened here. So 3 years ago, Danny was ordered by the court to relinquish all of his firearms, to turn them over. And it turns out like 23 weapons he was supposed to turn over, well, he didn't turn over about 10 of them. And it turns out there's no checks and balances in place in the system to follow up on things like this. Like, in other words, you might go, my God, who dropped the ball? Technically, nobody. That's what's a little scary here. Yep. Technically, nobody dropped the ball. Everyone did what they were supposed to do, but there aren't enough people that are supposed to verify these things. I don't know. Does that sound crazy? What you said could be true, and nobody actually dropped the ball?
Yeah, absolutely. And without getting into the politics of it, this is the crux of sort of the gun control debate. It's not about taking weapons away. It's about tracking where they're moving around the country. I mean, I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but you're right. That's a major issue in gun control legislation around the country. Is if the court in this case, the court orders, thou shalt get rid of, dispossess these weapons, and either Danny Masterson or his attorney, his agent, whoever says this has been done, there's no way to independently prove that unless it's going through, unless you're doing it through like a gun store where they're a federal firearms license holder, and there's certain disclosures they have to make. If you decide to sell it to an independent third party, that's an unregulated sale. So there's absolutely a loophole here.
Yeah. Now, to be clear, we're talking about something totally. I don't actually believe that Danny sold any of his weapons to anybody in Tennessee, but
right.
But 3 years ago, when Danny was ordered to turn all these weapons in, his attorney Thomas Mesereau filed under seal some type of document that was executed by somebody else. And what's crazy is that so many new judges have been assigned to this case. No one in the deputy attorney's office, not Deputy DA Reinhold Mueller, not Ariel Anson, and not Judge and especially not Judge Almeida, has ever seen the document that's under seal, to the best of my knowledge.
So now
that document is still sealed.
So what I will say is that it was filed under seal, but the judge has a right to view it, and the DA's office has the right to view it because they're a party to the case. If I'm a party. Okay, so it's available to them. They may have elected not to, but I would just logistically, it should be available to them. Whether they executed the right to access it or not is a different issue.
Okay, so we'll have to revisit that at a later time then. So basically, what happened is, Danny thought he was going to get away with this because he didn't think he was going to be found guilty. So all of a sudden, he gets found guilty. All of a sudden, he's got to prove he got rid of these weapons he never got rid of. How do you prove that? And I think in his mind, he's realizing I've violated federal weapons laws for which I could get in a lot of trouble.
Right.
And even though he's in prison for having gotten in a lot of trouble, he's like, wow, we've got to figure out how to cover up the fact that I've broken many federal weapons laws here.
Yeah.
And so it turns out that he claims to have had no knowledge of of who has these guns, where they could be for the last 3 years. He gives his brother, Jordan Masterson, power of attorney to dispose of these weapons. That power of attorney was good for 30 days. That period came and went. No weapons had turned up. And then all of a sudden, one of Danny's besties, Mike Shupin, shows up at a gun store in Oregon and turns in all of Danny's guns, but claims they're his guns, claims he bought them from a friend in Tennessee at an unspecified time. And it turns out many of these guns are illegally modified, would be completely would be completely illegal to own in California and would be completely illegal to transfer to another party in California. So they've got to come up with some bullshit story on how the transfer of these guns took place in Tennessee. By the way, the guy claims to live in Tennessee, hasn't lived in Tennessee in years. The guy really lives in California. But he used to live in Tennessee, and he still has a Tennessee's driver's license, or at least still has access to one. It's not clear whether he used an expired license or not. But he showed up in the gun store with a Tennessee ID. The guy does not live in Tennessee. He lives in California. This has been verified.
Right.
And he's turning in guns. Now you might go, well, why didn't Danny's brother Jordan just take Danny's weapons and turn them into a gun store in California? Now I think the answer is because the gun store would have said these are illegal. We can't take these. Correct. Now, do you have an opinion on whether a store would be allowed to take possession in California of an illegal gun?
So if whether it's a store or it's an individual who has an FFL, if you are a licensed federal firearms, if you're a federal firearms license holder, whether it's a business entity or an individual, you cannot knowingly take a weapon that is illegal. Whether and knowing in this case is a very broad, either knows or reasonably should know. If I work at a gun store and I hold a license to possess certain types of weapons, the law presumes I know what's legal and what's not, because I had to get certified and go through all the training and all those things to get that certification. So I can't simply say, oh, I didn't know it was full auto. Oh, I didn't know that it was modified in an illegal manner. It is my job as the business owner to know what's legal and not legal. And if there's ever a doubt, a gun shop owner will say, sorry, listen, I love doing business, but I can't do business with you for this transaction. I can't take that gun in my store.
Mm-hmm. By the way, I was told none of them are full auto. We're talking about things like vertical grips, collapsible stocks, and magazines that are way too big, that kind of stuff.
Oh, okay.
Now, again, as someone in Florida who knows a lot of people who have an incredibly large amount of weapons, I hear those things and I go, is that really a big deal? And it sounds like the answer is, yeah, that's a really big deal.
So it can, jurisdiction by jurisdiction. So ultimately, the way the law works, any state can pass a law that is more restrictive than the federal government, at least as it pertains to weapons. They cannot, however, be less restrictive. So if the government says, yes, you can lawfully own assault weapon looking, an AR-15 is not an assault weapon, is just a repeating rifle, right? A semi-automatic, but you can own it. You can have it on collapsible stock. You can have all the vertical grips, anything. But a state can say, yeah, you can't have those here. What a state can't say is, yeah, you can have a full auto anything you want to without being licensed if federal law doesn't allow it. So a state can be more restrictive, and in California, they're much more restrictive, and but they can't be less restrictive. And so you go across the border to Nevada, you go across the border to Oregon, those may very well be perfectly legal firearms. But in California, they're not. And that's the way the law reads.
Mm. A piece of this that, again, Zach, can you do me a favor? Try pushing your microphone a little bit away from your face. Apparently our audio levels are meaningfully different.
Okay.
All right. Let's just give that a shot. Okay.
Sure.
My understanding, and I'm not an expert on the language of Prop 63, but Prop 63, I believe, is a California statute that has to do with why and what Danny had to do with his weapons based on the court order that he received. That he was supposed to relinquish his weapons, and that the definition of relinquish in this case would not be just to give them to someone else to hold. It would be to no longer be in ownership of them. Do you have an opinion on this?
I could see where that definition, that statute would be in place. A lot of states have a version of this. Even states that are much more conservative and gun owner friendly than California have statutes that are similar to this. If it's domestic violence, if it is SA, if you commit a crime of violence using, or you're accused of having committed a crime using a weapon, the government can absolutely say you have to surrender and dispossess yourself of these weapons until your case is concluded. What that looks like, maybe you can give them to your neighbor. Maybe you can give them to your dad. Maybe you have to turn, in some place you have to turn them into the sheriff's office, and the sheriff's office will hold them in their safe, in their weapons room. It varies state by state, but I could absolutely see where that would be an absolutely appropriate thing to do based on the allegations that he was charged. Well, now the crimes he's been convicted of.
Right. And aside from what he was supposed to do with the weapons during the trial, it seems like it's much more cut and dry what he was supposed to do with the weapons after the trial. He was supposed to completely dispossess himself of these weapons. And the problem that Danny's attorney, Kate Mangles, has, from what I'm told, by the way, Kate Mangles happens to be the daughter of David Miscavige's attorney, is that Kate Mangles swore in a declaration to the court that Danny had relinquished himself of all these weapons. And this is actually where the legal definition of relinquished comes into play, because she swore as an officer of the court that Danny had relinquished these weapons. And that, I'm told, the legal definition of this is basically transferred title. Now, where I get confused when I hear that language is that, to my knowledge, guns don't have titles. Now, there's some registrations, maybe in some states. I'm told the Department of Justice keeps track of registrations. Even is there a federal gun registry? I always thought there wasn't.
So, excuse me, there is a federal gun registry, but it's only for those weapons that require FFLs, federal firearms licenses. So, oversized calibers, fully automatics, suppressors and silencers, and that's part of the application process. When you apply to buy it, you're giving the government notice, I'm attempting to obtain this thing. And then after the sale goes through, the licensed firearms dealer has to submit to the federal government the transaction forms where it shows make, model, serial number, who bought it, the address that they have on file. And often if you're an FFL holder and you are possessing regulated weapons and you relocate, you have to notify the government of where you live. The government has a vested interest to know where fully automatic weapons that are legally owned by civilians, where they're located. They have an interest in knowing where suppressors and silencers that are legally owned by civilians are located. They have a vested interest in knowing where those things are.
Right. Because regardless of what story Danny or Jordan or Mike Shupin are going to come up with, the feds are going to dig into this and they're going to demand answers that make sense or else. And it seems to me that what occurred here is Danny gave Jordan the power of attorney to officially get rid of these weapons. Jordan realized, I can't get rid of these weapons in California, and I sure as hell ain't driving up to Oregon. And then they got Mike Shupin to come. This is what I'm speculating, to come to California, take possession of guns that are illegal to have in California, drove them to Oregon, and said, here's some guns a friend gave me. And then really just put those guns into storage. Now, the problem is that nothing I just described involves Danny actually relinquishing any weapons. A friend of his just basically came and took them and put them in storage at an out-of-state gun store. I'm not an expert on what crimes were violated there, but it seems to me like that is most likely what occurred.
Yeah. So a version, if not that exact thing, something very similar. That fact pattern is perfectly logical, I think. There's something too that I hope that everybody watching understands. For all of its hickeys and flaws, the federal government doesn't mess around when it comes to guns. There's things you can get away with. There's things they sort of ignore. But from a public policy perspective, the ATF, the DOJ, the FBI, they don't mess around when it comes to guns. And if you start screwing around with weapons and the interstate moving of weapons, which may or may not be legal or illegal, the government doesn't dick around with that. They'll pour every resource that they have. And remember, Congress has a blank checkbook. These departments have blank checks to invest the necessary resources. So, one, I think your fact pattern there is perfectly logical. I suspect that's very similar to what actually happened, if not exactly what happened. And also, when you start getting, in this case, Danny Masterson, Jordan Masterson, this other guy, when they get involved and they all start working together, that's when you end up with things like conspiracy. So now you start looking at additional things unrelated to the weapons charges. Now you look at conspiracy, attempted conspiracy. You obviously have non-compliance with the court order. There's probably a violation based on some Google research that we've done, a violation of the California gun registry laws. So there's some state crimes likely have been committed. Certainly some federal crimes have been committed. And the number of people involved in this is going to could be very, very expansive in terms of the number of people involved.
Yes. And that's right. I'm glad you mentioned violation of the court order, because that's one of the biggest problems here, is that it looks like Danny's attorney actually aided and abetted, facilitated. I don't know what the right word is.
Yeah.
In Danny violating a court order and federal law. Because here's the other thing where it gets interesting. Danny's team, for someone on Danny's team, for no reason that was obvious at the time to the court, redacted the name on the form that would have shown, well, who is it that actually turned in these guns? And I can tell you that it was assumed that person was Jordan Masterson. And someone on Danny's team realized that whatever the name was, because Jordan's the one who was given power of attorney to do this thing.
Right.
Someone on Masterson's team knew that the name that was on that form that would say who actually turned these in was going to be problematic enough that name had to be blacked out. And so now I think the question comes up, which one of Danny's attorneys decided to black out Mike Shupin's name? Because that attorney seems to have knowingly tried to withhold information from the court that would have made it evident some laws had been broken.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a couple of things to look at here. One, the attorneys, to the extent that they were involved. So if you go back to the violation of the court order, he's been convicted, he's going to prison, he violated the court order. Some people say, well, so what? Well, judges don't like it when their orders aren't followed, and those orders are in place for a reason. So any lawyer that submitted, anytime as a lawyer, as an officer of the court, anytime I submit something to the court, I don't have to raise my hand and take the oath because I took it when I was sworn in, but I'm under that oath constantly. So if I submit something that turns out to be false, it doesn't matter whether I knew it to be false or not. The presumption is I knew or should have known it was false when I submitted it. I, as the attorney, didn't do my due diligence. So the fact that Danny Masterson is in prison doesn't change the outcome. They're still going to go after the lawyer and the firm and everybody else who was involved in that, both from a criminal perspective, if they violated gun laws, but also from a bar discipline, attorney discipline perspective, right? These attorneys very well could be facing bar discipline or attorney discipline in California. And if you're like me and licensed in multiple states or multiple jurisdictions, if I get sideways in one state, I have to tell all the places I'm admitted that I'm in trouble somewhere. I have to notify all of the jurisdictions that I'm in trouble in one jurisdiction, because they may say we don't want attorneys who misbehave in our jurisdiction anymore. So there's lots of layers to this, at least from the lawyer's perspective.
It's interesting to consider all the people who would have newly potentially been involved in the commission of a crime, whether it's Kate Mangles or Mike Shupin or Jordan Masterson. But do you think it would rise to the level of interest of the federal government simply finding out that Danny possessed these weapons in California that are in fact illegal to own in California? Do you think they care about small potatoes like this?
Oh, maybe not. I think it depends on the egregiousness of the violation, specifically because if he violated federal law, it doesn't matter if the barrel was a 32nd of an inch too short. If it's too short, it's too short. But in this case, if they were simply violations of California law, the federal government isn't going to so much care, but the state of California will absolutely care. Where the federal government gets interested is, at some point, somebody moved a gun that was illegal in one state, transported across the border to another state. Whether it was legal in the second state or not doesn't matter. The fact is, an illegal weapon crossed the state line at some point. That's where the federal government is likely to be interested in this. Right? You didn't violate any federal laws because these guns are legal in the federal system, just not in that particular state. But you moved a weapon that was illegal in some component, was illegal where it was, and you moved it to another state. And when you cross that border with an illegal weapon, that becomes that becomes federal jurisdiction. The level of interest of the federal government remains to be seen. But I took a weapon that was illegal and I crossed the state line with it.
Right. Well, I guess we will see. I've been talking to some people familiar with the proceedings who think this is a very, very big deal. And I guess that remains to be seen. I think we'll know soon enough. I think we'll know this coming. I think it's Sunday. I think we'll know this coming week just how much of a big deal this is going to be. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on it before the week began. We might know tomorrow just how big of a deal this is going to be, but we'll see. Okay, there's one question here, or is it a statement? Freezy New Project. If this is a state gun crime, does that mean they cannot add federal time because it's not modified against federal regulations?
So yeah, this is a weirdly worded question, but the ultimately the question is, since the alleged gun violations or violations of California law, does that mean the feds can't come in and try and violate him for a federal weapons violation? If the violations only occurred in California, arguably the government couldn't do it. The federal government couldn't do it. But now we're talking about transactions that occurred in other states. We're talking about weapons that cross state lines. And so if you just do it within the confine of a state, a single state, the whole transaction, the federal government's going to have a hard time establishing jurisdiction. When I cross state lines and there's multiple states involved, now the FBI can jump in suit and tie, feet first, and say, let's get after it, right? So that's where the issue is here, I think, Freezy New Project. And it also goes back to when he's ordered to dispossess himself or relinquish these weapons, the burden is on him to prove he got rid of it. It is not on the government to prove he didn't.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big difference. It's harder to prove the absence of something, right? It's harder to prove I got rid of a weapon than it is for the state to prove that I didn't. Mm-hmm. Right. And so the burden is actually on Danny Masterson to show, if he's prosecuted at some point, or anybody involved with his attorneys, Jordan, this other guy from Tennessee, whoever, if at any point they were involved, they have to show that they properly relinquished or dispossessed the ownership of these firearms from Danny Masterson to somebody else. And that's going to be really, really hard to prove, especially when they were missing for 3 years.
And that's part of the thing here is it should have been so simple. If they had not been trying to engage in obfuscation and subterfuge, it would have been so simple. Like even this Mike Shupin, he could have just gone to the gun store and instead of putting them into storage, he could have just sold them, and then sent documentation that these guns were sold, and then nobody could. Because here's the thing: if he had just proven that they were sold, nobody would be like, "But did Danny sell them, or did Danny give them to Mike and then Mike sold them?" Who cares? They're sold. They're sold. The conversation would have been over.
Exactly. And this is why it's always easier for those who are watching. If you ever choose to get rid of a firearm, or you're ordered to get rid of a firearm, if you run through a federally licensed dealer or individual, they're required to generate the paperwork necessary to prove the transaction happened. If you sell it out of the trunk of your Cadillac at a strip club parking lot, there's no legal requirement that you do, unless somebody has a federal firearms license. There's no requirement paperwork be done. So if you're ever tasked with this, go the route where the paperwork is generated, because it's when you're going to be asked to prove it. You show the bill of sale, you show the transfer documents, you show everything that's been submitted, and you can establish conclusively that you dispossessed yourself of that weapon.
Yeah. Okay, good. Let's see. I'm not sure what this next one means. Would Elaine Bredehoff have faced repercussions?
Elaine Bredehoff was Amber Heard's lead attorney in the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial.
Oh.
So Miss Mintats, would she have faced repercussions? I'm not necessarily sure what you're asking here. Just because she made some terrible lawyering decisions isn't grounds for discipline. Lawyers have the right to be really bad at their job. That doesn't necessarily mean you face bar discipline, but it's a funny question.
Okay, Bubba Phillips says, I wonder if that Bushmaster was a pre-ban manufactured gun bought after the 2004 sunset. Man, that would be a really specific.
Yeah, so that'd be serial number specific. Of course, those serial numbers are submitted to the government. The government has a database of all the serial numbers and when they were manufactured. And as long as it wasn't purchased from Bushmaster, which they didn't sell them after 2004, it's not inherently illegal to engage in the purchase and sale of these weapons, as long as you're not doing it through a licensed dealer.
Interesting. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to try to better understand the actual laws that are in play here, because I'm not as familiar with Prop 63 as I should be. yeah, and we'll see what else happens this week. And I feel like there's going to be a lot more for us to discuss. But for now, that is all we have, folks. If you're not subscribed to Zach's channel, you'll find him on YouTube at My Lawyer Friend. Is it My Lawyer Friend Zach or Your Lawyer Friend Zach?
It's Your Lawyer Friend Zach. I'm the friend, so it's Your Lawyer Friend.
It's Your Lawyer Friend Zach. All right, guys, thank you for hanging out with us this evening. Thank you, as always, to everyone who watches until the very end. And we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe